Okay, let's talk about types of flaws. Now this whole discussion of types of flaws is meant for you to work more efficiently, because there is nothing that I'm going to say here that you couldn't figure out if you could just sit there and look at it and think about it and figure it out. Because these are all just different ways of saying that the author of the argument has assumed something. But there are different ways of saying that the author has assumed something that recur commonly. So these authors of these arguments make the same kind of mistakes over and over and over again, and simply because they've repeated these mistakes, we can begin to talk about them as types of flaws. These first two are types that really only occur on the LSAT. These are not classical logical fallacies. If you want to impress some philosopher with your knowledge of jargon, don't start talking about the ascriptive error. On this test, I'll talk about the ascriptive error as the most common. Oh, and a word about this ranking. There's a very, very rough order of appearance from the most popular to the least often occurring, but it's only very rough. And from test to test, you may see more of one kind of flaw than another. I will tell you this much: these first three are by far the most common recurring types of flaws. The first is what I'll refer to as the ascriptive error. And it really only exists on this test, and this is the way it works. On this test with the ascriptive argument, that is the argument that ascribes a position to some third party in order to refute it, the author of the argument will always make the same assumption, and that is the assumption that her evidence matters. Remember the argument, some people say that Stanley doesn't like peanut butter, but those people are clearly mistaken. Conclusion of the argument: they're mistaken. Stanley does like peanut butter. Some people, and I love those words because I know where the argument is headed. Those people are dumb, those people are wrong, and I'm going to commit the ascriptive error. Some people say that Stanley doesn't like peanut butter, but those people are clearly mistaken because only yesterday I saw him eating a sandwich. And it's that same flaw that we're going to see repeated over and over and over with almost every ascriptive argument. Then it is the assumption that the evidence matters. Nobody said it was a peanut butter sandwich. And as you know, even if it were a peanut butter sandwich, which nobody said it was, even if it were, it still wouldn't go any distance towards proving how Stanley feels about peanut butter. But usually it's just that bad. I saw him eating a sandwich, which has nothing to do with whether or not he likes peanut butter. We've just assumed that that evidence matters. We've assumed that there was a link there. And it's very natural to assume it. Why else would you be talking about a sandwich? But the thing is, unless you tell me that it's peanut butter, I can't just assume that it was. The ascriptive error is the assumption that the refuting evidence matters to the position being refuted. It's the assumption that it was a peanut butter sandwich. We talked a little about that before. The prescriptive error, and again, these two occurring really only on the LSAT. The prescriptive error is that basic assumption whenever a prescription is made, the basic assumption that the prescription works. That the prescription works. So, for example, you're feeling a little low on energy, you're feeling a little lull in your ability to wake up and meet the day. You know what you should do? You should drink a 12-pack of beer before bed every night. But why? And the assumption there is that somehow drinking a 12-pack of beer is going to help meet your energy quotient throughout the day, when in fact it might make things worse. And it might make you feel less energy, and it might make you feel worse overall. And in all cases, when someone offers a prescription, the assumption is that the prescription works. They'll never prove that it works. They'll simply assume that it does. And we've seen this on actual LSAT material with cases like, you might remember, the problem of the monthly versus non-monthly expenses. And everybody knows to track their monthly expenses, but they've also got to consider that they must track their non-monthly expenses as well. For this reason, the use of a cash flow statement is critical. What? And there it is in LSAT world. Why a cash flow statement? Well, the same reason you ought to drink a 12-pack of beer before bed. we've assumed that it'll work. Nobody says that a cash flow statement will help you track non-monthly expenses. We just throw it out there as a solution. And in every instance, it's the same thing. The prescriptive argument will not demonstrate that the solution or the prescription works. We'll simply assume that it does, and that's a flaw. It's bad to do. The causal argument. We've talked about this the last time we met. It's that any argument that argues from cause. I noticed that the girls in my math class who got A's on the test were all wearing blue skirts. Yeah? And so before the next math test, guess who's buying a blue skirt? That's right. Except maybe it wasn't wearing the blue skirts that caused them to get the A's on the math test. Maybe there was some other cause. And in all instances, the causal argument, any argument that concludes one thing caused another, has necessarily assumed a causal relationship. And there are three main versions of this, you'll recall. Always the same, always boiling down to the same thing, the assumption that there is no other cause. And sometimes you're assuming that there's no third cause. So the girls in the skirts and the math test, you know, maybe wearing a skirt, a blue skirt, is the uniform of the mathletes. And so the girls are wearing blue skirts and they got A's on their math test precisely because they are mathletes. Not that the skirts caused the good grades, but that being a mathlete caused both. You assume that there's no other cause. You have assumed that it's not just coincidence. You assume it's not just coincidence. And coincidence we could think of as another cause. You know, maybe girls are smarter than boys, and maybe blue is the color of the season this year, and so it's just a coincidence that the girls who got the A's on the math test happen to be wearing blue skirts. Most girls wear blue skirts nowadays. Coincidence as cause. You've assumed that it's not that. You've assumed that it's not some other cause. You've assumed that it's not coincidence. You've assumed that it is not reversed cause. And again, you know, some other cause as you know, in this case, just a reversal. You've assumed that it wasn't the one thing that caused the other. And it's kind of hard to see how getting an A on a math test caused you to wear a blue skirt, but let me give you this example. I think we may have spoken about this. Numerous studies have indicated that people who exercise regularly have more energy than people who do not. So if you want more pep in your step, you should get to the gym and do some exercise. And again, causal argument didn't have to use the word cause, just assumes that the causal relationship works, and in this case has assumed that it is not reverse cause. It has assumed that doing the exercise causes the increase in energy. It might be the other way around. Maybe it's just those energetic people who go out to the gym and exercise. Reverse cause. So one of those three things, that it's no other cause, that it's not simply coincidence or correlation, and that it's not reverse cause. All of them boiling down to that same basic assumption that there's no other cause. Causal. The analogy flaw. The analogy flaw. This is a common error of reasoning on the test, not as common as these three, but like I said, roughly a descending order of occurrence. The analogy flaw is the assumption that two things under discussion are analogous. So, for example, you might say, wait a minute, don't beat your child. You wouldn't beat a defenseless dog, would you? And the assumption there is that beating your child is the same thing as beating a dog. This is the second time I've talked about beating a dog. One might wonder what's on my mind. The assumption is that beating a child is the same thing as beating a dog, when they might be different. You say, well, certainly she can handle that math problem because she's got an A in physics. And the assumption is that the skills that were useful to her in physics are also useful to her in math. You say, you know, well, you can't eat 24 pounds of carrots. I mean, you wouldn't eat 24 pounds of donuts. And the assumption is that what you would do with donuts is the same as what you do with carrots, and on and on and on and on and on. And every single time you see an argument function by making a comparison of one thing to another thing, the flaw of that argument is going to be the assumption that those two things are comparable.